What's up, everyone? My name is Wes, and you're listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. For today's episode, I got to talk with Santa Fe-based musician Betty Taylor, who makes music as Velvet Vision. In 2019, Betty released an EP with her Minneapolis band Delilah Fang. Since then, she's released a handful of synth-based songs and compositions under the new moniker, including a new single from the end of January. Betty shared about her cross-country experiences, working with different collaborators, the inspirations behind her songs, and more. Without further ado, here's my interview with Betty from Velvet Vision on the Ear Coffee Podcast. How are you doing on this Wednesday evening?
I'm great. I wrapped up work maybe an hour ago, and it's a little chilly here, but definitely not as chilly as it is there, so that's cool.
Yeah, I think we're at like negative 13 today or something, which is hopefully like the bottom. Hopefully that's the lowest for the year, but who knows? Cool. Just to get things going, since I think maybe not as many local folks are aware and have kept up with your music as Velvet Vision, they may have seen Delilah Fang, which was your previous band. We'll talk about that a little bit, but just for pretty much everybody, if you want to just give a brief introduction, that'd be a fantastic way to get things going.
Yeah, so I have this project called Velvet Vision. It's a solo project, and usually when I talk about the sound, it's easy just right away to call it synth pop, because that's something that people kind of can wrap their heads around right
They've
away.
heard of that before.
Yeah. Synth pop, and it's just all me. Yeah, I'm based in Santa Fe now, but I lived in Minneapolis prior to this.
That's where the connection comes in. I like talking when I talk to any musician or artist to ask them the same question. I find that pretty much anyone who pursues art and has created in some capacity has a special relationship with that art form. So in this case, with music. So I'm curious, what was your early relationship with music like, and just how did you grow into that and develop that? Talk just a little bit about your kind of first experiences really connecting with music, just as a listener and then eventually as a musician and as a performer.
Okay, yeah. So I grew up pretty immersed in music. Both of my parents are musicians, so there was always music around the house. And my mom is also a piano teacher, so she a lot of times was teaching piano out of our house. So that was around a lot. And then in middle school, I think it was, I started playing the violin as like my chosen instrument. And then I played up through high school. So that's kind of the main thing that I learned music theory on. I went to high school in Duluth. So yeah, so it was mostly that. And then, yeah, it's kind of funny that I'm a performer and like a more public facing artist, because growing up, I was always super, super shy. And I still have like a lot of anxiety over putting things out. But yeah, growing up, that was something like singing in front of people was like a total no-go.
What was there like a particular catalyst that kind of helped you overcome that anxiety or maybe reservations and still make that step into performing in a band, releasing songs that you've written and kind of arrive at where you've been for the last few years? Like, how did you kind of overcome that initial kind of leap into putting yourself out there in this way and putting out music and whatnot?
I think it started, I was working at an office job, and I kind of ignored my desire to do music for a while, just because I was so nervous to go in that direction. And I wasn't super confident in like financial stability of it. I mean, I'm obviously still not, or maybe not obviously. I'm not making any money doing music. But I finally got to a point where I realized that the desire to go in that direction was just like never going away. It was just like eating at me in the back of my mind. So finally I was like, okay, I just have to do it. So I started I went to an open mic at the Chatterbox Pub, if you're familiar with that place.
I've heard the name, I think, yeah.
I'm trying to think of what it's by. It's in, like, South Minneapolis, kinda.
Yeah. The name sounds really
Um,
familiar. Oh, and do they have, like, board games and, like, everything?
yes, they have
Yes,
board games
okay,
and, like, old, like, video games there that I think you can play.
cool. Yeah, I don't think I've ever been there because I was a child. But
Yeah.
I know the area, I remember. Yeah, okay. Set the scene.
Yeah, so they have an open mic every Tuesday. I have no idea if it's still going on. My friends who would go with me, I think I heard that maybe it was back on, but I don't know if it is still because of COVID. But
Yeah.
I went there once, and one of my good friends kind of pushed me to play. And I remember being like pissed because I was so nervous, and she was being like kind of pushy. And finally I did. And then that was sort of the start. And then she actually ended up posting a video on her Instagram of me playing that open mic. And then Tanner Grayler, who played guitar in Delilah Fang, uh, he is an old, well, now he's like one of my best friends. But at that time, I knew him through, he was like kind of on the periphery of like my friend circle in high school. He went to a different high school in Duluth. And so we would all a lot of times end up at like the same social events, or I would like see him around. Like he played in a band with one of my best friends. But anyways, he saw that video and was like, "Oh, I didn't realize like Betty did music." And I started to get to know him, and we started making stuff together, and then we ended up becoming roommates. Yeah, he was like a really big supporter, and like anytime I had stuff that I was really nervous to share, I had like a fuck ton of voice memos, and I would send them to him, and he was just always like, "Yeah, this is really good, like, you can write songs," and just, like, really supportive.
Yeah, just really encouraging. Yeah, so I guess beyond that, how did you two and enlist the rest of your bandmates and start putting out music and performing as Delilah Fang, which was how I was introduced to your music back in I think 2019. But yeah, how did the band form and just kind of evolve into what it was for a very brief while?
Yeah. So, I had made the decision that I wanted to move out of Minneapolis in like, right at the beginning of 2019, like, basically in January, and one thing that I kind of had on like, as a bucket list item, I guess, before I left was that I had written a collection of songs, and I just really wanted to play with like a full band, just like one show before I left. So I was talking to Tanner about that because we were living together at the time. And I was like, yeah, like before I move away, I just really want to do one show just because I haven't really performed these songs live with a band. And I think that would be like really special and also would give me a lot of confidence moving to a new place and like getting involved in a music scene. Um, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's totally possible. Like we can find people, we can book a show. We can do it." So he was like, "I can play lead guitar. I am not personally a great guitar player, but I can do like an okay rhythm guitar." So we had that covered. He was he had played with Lee Carter, who was our bassist, in another one of his projects. So he was like, "I can ask Lee if he would be interested in playing bass." And then for drummers, Elise, I knew of because she shared a studio space at the time with one of my friends in one of like, I don't know for sure if it was the Casket Arts building, but one of like the Northeast big brick buildings. So, anyways, I reached out to her, and she also drums for Ahem. I don't know if they're, yeah. Uh, so I was already aware of like her drumming, and she is like the nicest person, but I had never really spoken to her much, and I hadn't ever met Lee. And when I reached out to Elise, she was like, "Oh yeah, do you want like a keyboardist too?" And I was like, "Sure, okay." And she was like, "My partner plays keys, so like he'll come too." So yeah, then we had this group, and it was kind of crazy. We also like last minute found a practice space through like one of my friends' coworkers who was in a band. And our first practice, it was like my first time meeting basically everyone except for Tanner, and I think I had met Elise like once. But everyone was like, I don't know, it was kind of crazy. Everybody just like meshed really well. It was really fun. Everyone was on time.
That's huge,
And
especially
yeah,
for a five piece. Yeah.
yeah, it was like so dreamy that when the time came that I had like planned to move away, I was like, "Ooh, I feel like I almost would stay for this." But I just had to get out of there. I mean, I just never left, so
Yeah. No, that it's been a different change of scene, I'm guessing, in New Mexico. And just traveling beyond the frigid borders of Minnesota. With Delilah Fang and with those songs that I guess you brought to these people who you were meeting ostensibly for the first time, or at least the first, I guess, more extended period of time. Um, where were you kind of coming from with writing a lot of the songs? What were some of your inspirations for that project? And how did you kind of envision it coming together as a full band thing, especially since it sounds like it was originated as just you and you brought the songs to these other musicians and to your collaborators? Just talk a little bit about that.
yeah. I I remember I had no idea like what went into like leading a band, I guess, because that's effectively what I was doing. So I feel like I definitely actually leaned a lot on Tanner. I was like, okay, when we have our first practice, like, what do I do? Like, what are people expecting of me? And he was like, maybe type out like the lyrics and like the chords and yeah, just have those ready. And I had chosen, well, so then we talked about like, okay, what's the normal length for a set? Because I had played like one like short set before, and then it was just open mics before that. So I was like, I don't know, like how many songs like do you play in a show? And as if I had like never been to a show before, but he was like, I don't know, maybe if you have like five. And so I had, I think four that were done and one that was like half done, but I was like, okay, I got to finish this really fast. And I went to the library in Highland Park and I like typed out all of the lyrics and chords and like printed a bunch of copies. And then I went to Office Max and I bought like 4 or 5 folders. And then when we showed up to practice, I like handed out folders to everyone and was like, here are your folders. And luckily everybody in the band is pretty good at like music theory and stuff. So like having a document like that was actually helpful. I do remember there were moments when we would practice where actually the 4 of them would be like, "Oh, at this part, like, what if we did this thing where we, like, break here?" And I would be, like, really confused. And then they were, like, very kind and very patient and, uh, would kinda explain to me slowly, like, what their ideas were with how the arrangement of the song, like, what they were envisioning, and then, like, if that was cool with me, and usually they were great ideas, so I was like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, if we did a break there, that'd be so cool."
With how long it sounds like you had a handful of time spent with these songs before they were brought into a full band in the recording setting. Um, how did you kind of grow with those songs, and how long ago were a lot of these songs written, and just kind of what was that initial process like before you even thought of playing a final show and kind of forming a band and releasing an EP, especially even. Just kind of walk us through the kind of originations for a lot of these, if not all of them, because there's just the one EP, I believe, for Delilah Fang and this project.
For Delilah Fang or for this project now or both of them or
Yeah, just for Delilah Fang, just kind of like a little recap and like talking about
Oh, yeah.
just writing those songs and how long ago maybe they were written, if you or some were more recent. I think at least one of them sounds like it was written more close to when the EP came out.
So, yeah, most of them I had kinda just started writing in the apartment that I lived in before I lived with Tanner. I was living alone, and I was just kinda noodling on my guitar, and I know, like, a handful of chords, so basically just doing what I knew how to do and like the chords that I could play, which were almost all open chords. I can like kind of play an F.
It's hard. It's hard.
It is. F is hard. um, but yeah, and then I sort of taught myself how to finger pick, so that I incorporated into quite a few of the songs. And then when I was working that office job that I really was not keen on, I would kind of just like write lyrics. Like if something popped into my head, I would like, write on a post-it or like put it in my notepads. And a lot of times if because my commute was like an hour each way. It was kind of out by like Forest Lake, but like even further out. And I was yeah, it was the worst. And I was commuting from like Whittier.
Oh dear.
So so a lot of times too, I remember I would have drives where I would have like a melody pop into my head and I would like pull out my voice memo like while I was on the highway and just like sing into my voice memos, which maybe wasn't the safest, but
It's understandable. I
I
think we've all been there. We've all done something like that.
yeah. And so yeah, then if I got home from work or if it was like a weekend or something, I would have kind of like a melody idea and I would have some words scribbled out and I could kind of put them together like a puzzle, and that's how a lot of them started. And Plastic Champagne Flutes, which is on that EP, was the first one I wrote. That was like the first song that I like have have ever written, like completed. So I was pretty proud of that one. Then the last one that we finished was Imposter Syndrome, and Tanner and I like collaborated a lot on that song. We wrote the bridge together and we wrote the chorus together. And that was kind of my first time actually writing with someone outside of like the instrumental arrangement. So that was like a cool experience too.
Beyond even just kind of prepping for this one show, this opportunity you wanted to have before moving, it's a whole nother thing to go in and record and release these songs as an EP and put, I guess, a more permanent stamp on the band as a little bit of a legacy, even just with the one EP out there, having allowing people to connect with that. What was that decision making like? Like, what led you to actually want to record all these songs and make it even bigger than just playing a show as the newly formed band?
Yeah. So actually, I guess also I wanted to add on. So I know that I had talked about like I just wanted to play one show. And then that ended up like kind of snowballing into like, oh, like we could play here, or like this person got back to me, but also this person got back to me and we like could book two shows. So we ended up before we left playing four shows. Or before I left. We played our first show at the Kitty Cat Club, and then we played one at the Wolf House, which is like not Part Wolf. It's a different like although we did end up playing at Part Wolf later. How do I describe the Wolf House? It is like I don't actually know. I think it's like a rental property. But the woman who owns it also hosts shows there. I don't know if she still does, but they're mostly acoustic. So we did an acoustic set. And then we played at the Entry the night before like I left, and that was also our EP release. And then yeah, and then we played one other show and we played a Basement House show and that was really cool.
Just getting one
um
house show in before you leave. Yeah.
anyways, that had nothing to do with recording except for the fact that so our first show at Kitty Cat Club, uh right before we were about to play our last song, Tanner like grabbed the mic and was like, "Hey, so, we all know that this like really means a lot to you. And so I've secretly been like talking to your friends and the rest of the band, and we've all like raised this money to record an EP like in a studio." So
Wow.
yeah, so I had like no knowledge or intention of ever recording these songs. Like I really genuinely just wanted to play one show. But yeah, that was like very, very special and something that I'll never forget.
Yeah. what an incredible gift. That's nuts to just have not known that these songs are going to end up getting recorded.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I don't know, Tanner is definitely like a surprise guy. So knowing him more, it is totally in character for him to do something like that. But yeah, it just meant a lot because it was like all of my closest, oldest friends who pitched in on this, and a lot of people that I didn't really know super well. And then everybody who was in the band chipped in, which was also crazy because I had like just met them.
So after releasing the EP, getting this kind of final send off in a lot of ways, were you still intending to continue to write songs? I mean, obviously you did end up continuing to write and release songs, but what was your kind of hope or expectation for yourself after you moved? Were you immediately planning on working on some music and trying to start a new project wherever you ended up living, where you landed? Or was it a little bit more like, was there just kind of a period in between? I guess just talk a little bit about kind of the transition between when Delilah Fang ended, when you moved, and when I guess Velvet Vision, your current project, kind of started to materialize before releasing your self-titled EP. And
I definitely had the intention of continuing to play music no matter where I was going to go.
Mhm.
I played one show with Delilah Fang again when I was back to visit in like November of 2019, so just a few months after I left. And I think there was like a little bit of talk about like, maybe if we like come up with more stuff, then we could like play more. I don't know. It just like it was hard with the distance, and I kind of am an impatient person, so I just wanted to like get stuff out. So I was making stuff kind of right away. I was nervous to do it solo. I like taught myself Ableton, and I was like messing around with a loop pedal for a while. I ended up buying a synthesizer, and I met a good friend here who actually does the mixing and mastering for my Velvet Vision project. His name is Theo Krantz, and he was one of my first friends in Santa Fe. He also does a little bit of production work on my uh, most of my music. So yeah, he's like definitely a key player. Um, but yeah, he taught me a lot about Ableton, and just was like also a very big supporter. I had a lot of insecurities, I guess, about doing something by myself and not only recording and putting it out, but then like, how do I even perform it live? Yeah. And then when the pandemic hit, that was really conducive to doing things alone.
Jumping kind of ahead a year almost, a year between when the pandemic began and when your self-titled EP came out in March of 2021. Um, After the kind of initial catalyst or the time spent alone and being able to work on things like that, um, where was that process kind of leading you? How was that? Was it very different from kind of the process when you were writing your song, the songs for Delilah Fang, or I guess that ended up being Delilah Fang songs? Or was it just kind of, were you relying on similar habits, and kind of what was the writing like for this first EP early on, leading into kind of, I guess, when the project solidified a little bit more around the EP's actual release and whatnot in March?
I feel like the process was a lot different, mostly because the majority of the stuff I was doing was just like on my laptop in headphones. I have an SP404 sampler that I would like mess around on a lot and just kind of like get some early ideas out. And then I would record those into my laptop. I don't know. I love playing music with other people and like playing in bands. It's like really rewarding. But then on the other hand, I really like doing things alone because I can take as much time as I want to get like exactly the sound I want. And I also feel like I just learn a ton. Doing something a little more electronic focused was something that I have been wanting to do for a really long time. So, yeah, being able to learn Ableton and getting like a synthesizer and doing all of that was pretty cool. And then another aspect of my production that sometimes is like a bit of a curse that I get stuck in, but I do like a lot of loop-based things. So if I have an idea, I'll like, build up the instrumentation until I have like a loop that I like really well, and then I can write verses over that. And then sometimes I'm like, ooh, okay, so I have this chord progression and it's a loop and I really like it, but then what's the next, like what's the chorus, or like how do I like build up a new section of the song with all the instrumentation. So yeah, that was a challenge. And then yeah, a lot of loop based stuff
Yeah.
for this project.
Yeah. When did the actual EP, I guess, start to materialize? When you maybe started to first kind of feel like there's a collection of songs, or at least songs that could be grouped together. Um, there are the three, I guess, vocally driven songs, and then there's the one instrumental as well.
Hmm.
So I guess, when did that idea for the EP, maybe in like some sequencing and maybe even just the general formation for the EP, when did that kind of start coming about, and where were your inspirations for some of the ideas around the EP coming from?
I feel like I'm kind of backwards in this way, where a lot of times I'll decide that I want to write an EP or like put out an album before I actually have the material for it. I was sort of confronted with this in another podcast interview I did a couple weeks ago where I was like, "Yeah, I wanna release an album this year, but I, like, haven't started on it, and I don't even know if I have one."
I mean, that's
But
just setting goals. That's just setting goals for yourself.
yeah, I'm really big into goal setting. So, I had decided that I wanted to put out an EP, like, a little collection of songs with this solo project. So, I had written "Springtime Buzz," and I was, like, super hyped on how that turned out, and I don't know, the act of, like, creating and producing became sort of addictive, so it didn't feel like I was pushing myself too much to, like, get an EP out or something, like, I was gonna continue writing songs anyways. But I think I Was Such a Different Person Last Time came second, and then I had About Flowers, and at that point, I remember being like, "Okay, I'm at 3, I would like to put out 4." And Epilogue, which is the completely instrumental one. Outside of, like, the producing that I was doing with those other tracks, I was just a lot of times, like, hooking stuff up and just, like, playing with whatever I had, and just I would make record like, I have a bunch of SoundCloud recordings that are just, like, random loops or, like, whatever, like, shit that I've been playing around with. And so Epilogue actually was kind of one of those, and then it ended up being this thing that I really liked, and I was like, "Ah, would it be, like, weird if I put that on an EP because it's so different from the other songs?" But I don't know, I ultimately decided that I was really fond of that track, and I thought it would be a nice way to close it, so it
Yeah.
made it.
Have you wanted, or even maybe have you explored kind of that more ambient direction at all? Or have you still mostly been exploring kind of just songwriting and like lyrical writing on top of the composition? Is there an ambient EP or something that could get released at any minute?
Um, it's definitely within the realm of possibility, like, I find myself just kind of making stuff like that pretty often, but I never it's kinda just for, like, sketches or, like, kind of exercises for me. A lot of them make it to SoundCloud, and then my friend Theo, the one that was one of my first friends in Santa Fe I was telling you about, when I first met him and before I started producing this stuff for Velvet Vision, him and I started an ambient duo that we called just ET.
Bring it
So
back.
that's on Bandcamp. And that in that I just play the violin and then I run my violin through an effects pedal and then through a loop pedal. And he usually will play a synthesizer, and then he does a lot of like live tape looping, like cassette tape looping, and like distorts like these cassette tape noises.
That's
So
sick.
Yeah, it's so cool. He's like a very extremely talented ambient musician, and I am like lucky to be his friend. But uh yeah, we haven't done anything with that in a while. We played one show like right before the pandemic hit at my house, and that was really fun. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like we talk a lot about like, oh yeah, like we should put something out, and then I don't know, we get busy, but maybe at some point.
Fingers crossed. So, gonna jump a few months ahead only. Pretty shortly after you put out your first EP, you put out the other song, your newest, or yes, at the time, newest single, Garden Department in May of 2021. Um, so it was very shortly after the EP came out, and sounds like you were pretty productive at the time. Did you were you I guess aware, or was what made you want to put it out so close to the EP? Is I guess what I'm trying to ask, because it was just kind of a pleasant surprise after we already kind of had there's some four songs to kind of sit with, um, and also just kind of talk about where that song had come from so quickly after uh, putting out the self-titled EP in March.
Yeah, that song did come out like pretty fast. Like it came out of me very fast. Like the other songs on the EP, I feel like I just hemmed and hawed over for so long just because I was, it was like my first release, so I was being like extremely meticulous. And with Garden Department, I was the same way, but I was trying to not get like too hung up on like these little details and just like get the thing out. I also felt like just I guess from potentially like a strategic point that having a single to follow the EP like really quickly after would like potentially retain people who had listened to my EP and like, be like, "Oh, there's like a new single, so that's cool." I don't know if that I don't
It's
know if
all
that was
very
achieved or whatever, but
ambiguous, yeah.
yeah. Uh but yeah, I that one kind of just came out of nowhere. I didn't have plans really to write it until it came out. I was just kind of like messing around with my sampler, like with those vocal samples. And then I started to treat it more as like its own track once I added like drums and stuff. And I actually sent that track to Tanner to be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And he sent me a voice memo back and was like, "I hope you're not mad. Like I just like played guitar over it because I thought it sounded cool." And then I was like, "Oh my god, no, it sounds so cool. Will you like actually record guitar for it?" So then he did. And that's where like the beachy guitar comes in. Then I just
Oh,
put it out.
yeah, just sustaining the momentum is I'm sure like it's kind of like the marketing side of music would kind of term it,
Yeah.
and always plays a part, even if it's sometimes a bummer to be aware of. So we'll jump to more recently, just a few days or a handful of days before recording this on January 21st. You put out a little double single, a newer song called Silver Spring, and then an Electric Light
Silver
Orchestra cover.
City.
So, Silver City. I'm sorry, Silver Spring is a. Oh wow, they're a band out of like Philadelphia, and I don't know. My brain wandered for a second. You're right, Silver
That's
City.
okay.
That is the correct title. I even read it. I'm fired from podcasting now. This is embarrassing. I'm kidding.
You can edit that out.
Yeah, just a really poor dub over. Just anyways, back to your song. So Silver City, and then an Electric Light Orchestra cover, just as a fun B-side. And these songs kind of came about in an interesting way. It was inspired by and written while you were on a lengthy tour. I believe it was fall of last year. Correct me if I'm wrong. Fall, late spring, late
You
summer.
are right. Yeah, so we actually started on the tour at the end of August and we
Okay.
got back on November 5th. So it was a long tour.
Yeah. But these two songs, this cover and the original, both kind of sprung out of that period and that tour. So just talk a little bit about the tour and how you kind of took the feeling and that experience and turn that into the inspiration for sure writing Silver City, and then just recording the cover and just putting this out as a little fun little double single.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with the cover because that's actually what came first. I was watching the movie The Virgin Suicides over the summer, which I haven't seen in a very, very long time. And there's like a dance scene in it, like a school dance scene where their first dance is to Strange Magic. And I just kind of remember being like, wow, I forgot about that song. I like that song. And I started listening to it a lot that week. And then I was like, I bet I could cover this song. So I had this goal. I was playing a show. It was a Friday the 13th show in August. And I had a goal of getting that song done so I could play it for that show. And I thought it would be cool because, like, Strange Magic, Friday the 13th. I don't know. That seemed cool. And also, on top of that, my Velvet Vision set at that point was extremely short. I was mostly playing the 3 songs from the EP that I sing on, and then Garden Apartment, and sometimes I play Epilogue and I just, like, improv on the violin to that song. And, yeah, depending on how I'm feeling, sometimes I just get way too scared to do it. So, then I have a really short set. So I was, you know, partially, like, really wanted to cover that song, partially was like, "Okay, I have this show coming up, and I would love to add, like, 1 more song to my set." And I ended up being super stoked on how the cover came out, and I added that to my live set that I was just playing out, and then we left for that tour, and it was on that live set. And then, Silver City, I I had kind of been messing around with, like, bits and pieces of the chorus and the melody for actually a few months before we left for tour, and I just, like, couldn't put the pieces together, it just wasn't coming together the way I wanted it to. And then while we were on tour, we had a couple of stints where we would just have, like, no shows for a couple of weeks because we just, like, couldn't book in certain places, and it's a long story. But we had this goal to do, like, a whole loop around the country, and yeah, there were some blocks of time that we couldn't exactly book. So, we had one point where we were staying with my bandmate's parents. It was, like, her parents' house. She's from Oregon, so we were, like, in Bend, and we had all of this extra time, and I had brought my laptop with the intention of trying to finish a song while we were on tour, and I had written down some lyrics, like, in my phone notepad while we were driving. So I had some lyrics done, and I had a bit of the melody already from, like, a few months past, and then, yeah, I was able to just kinda, like, crank it out in, like, a few days, which was cool. And then I added it to my set. I had, my sampler with me, which is part of, like, my live set, so I, yeah, threw it together, and then it was on there, and I was performing. I mean, it was basically a completed version. I can do my own mixes, I just don't feel super confident in my own, like, final mixes, so usually I'll send all of my stems to Theo, and I trust his ear. So he did a final mix of it when we got back from tour, and that ended up being what got released a few days ago.
Yeah, cool. Um, what kind of were while you're on tour? What were some of the experiences maybe that stuck with you and kind of led to you writing a song, kind of summarizing, maybe in like a more poetic or loose way, this experience, um, beyond just kind of like the composition and as you were working on it in that extended kind of downtime period in Oregon.
Yeah. A lot of it, I feel like a lot of tour when we were out, we were just talking about like, wow, it would be so cool if we could do this forever. Like it's gonna suck when we have to go back to our jobs. Um, just being out of Santa Fe just felt really, really good. And yeah, I kind of wanted to capture like the daydreaminess of it. And there's like the line about like measuring my dollars in LA drinks. Like when we were in LA, we ended up, I don't know, like getting drinks a few times. And I remember being like, holy shit, like drinks are so expensive here. It was my first time ever being in LA. And then like subsequent weeks we would like stop at Trader Joe's or like wherever to like get groceries for the road. And in my head, I would calculate like, wow, like this amount of groceries is only like 4 margaritas in LA. And that ended up being like, I don't know, a metric that I would keep in mind weirdly. It just felt like a really big, like special adventure and something that is really near and dear to my heart still. And so I wanted to capture that. And it's almost a little bit of a shame because I wrote it early enough on tour. I mean, I guess it was lucky because I could perform it then for the rest of tour. But there was so much other stuff that happened because when we were in Oregon, it was September and we were still on the road until November. So there was a lot of other stuff that happened that I wish I could have stuck into that song. But
Just have it like keep on expanding it like every time, like as tour
yeah,
continue, you just add like a new verse for like each location or something, and it's like just a travelogue then.
yeah, seriously.
It's probably better that it ended up not being that. Uh, cool. So anyone who is interested in checking out your music, it's available on all streaming services. It's on, I believe, everything's on Bandcamp. Where else can people find you and check out the music?
Yeah, all streaming platforms, Bandcamp, you definitely covered that. I would say my most up-to-date social media platform is Instagram, and my handle is __ velvet dot vision. And I also, I'm gonna plug my radio show too, even though I don't actually play myself on it. I host a radio show every Sunday at a really small station uh, in a town, maybe 35 minutes outside of Santa Fe. And it is 96.9 KMRD, but it streams everywhere. And my show is Sundays from 3 to 4, and it's called The Independent Hour. And I play all independent releases.
Wow, cool. Definitely check that out. Like I think I'm guessing people can just get it on like either like the website or on like TuneIn or one of those like radio apps.
Yeah, if you go to, I should have plugged the URL. That was stupid. It's it's kmrd.fm/listen.
Okay. Every Sunday 3 to 4. Cool. Um
Yeah.
something beyond kind of maybe celebrating the release and the the natural celebration that comes when releasing any new music. But what does the future hold for the project? What are you looking forward to working on? If you're working on anything, and just kind of what else might we have to look forward to as well? Just music wise, show wise, just anything really.
Yeah. I have a show in the works that I'm planning in March, although it's going to be in Santa Fe, so that doesn't really help any Twin Cities listeners. um, Man, I did play a show. We played a show while we were on tour at Part Wolf, which I know is closed or
I
closing.
think it's
That
it's closing at
sucks.
the end of the month, which is a huge loss. That's a bummer.
Seriously, I love that place. But yeah, I'm thinking just as a personal goal, I've been saying that I want to try and write an album this year. We'll see how my motivation is for that. It's just been like a lot of kind of like messing around with sounds and seeing what comes out. And then I do have a lot of acoustic voice memos, just like acoustic guitar and singing that I'm maybe considering like mastering and releasing under Velvet Vision, even though the sound is totally different.
Okay,
But
cool.
also, who gives a fuck? Like, don't put me in a box.
Yeah, literally.
So, yeah, so that might be a thing that I release. I don't know. I'm kind of mulling it over still.
Well, we'll stay tuned. Um, so I like ending interviews in the same way like I do starting them. This will be an extra interesting question since you are no longer located in the Twin Cities and have, now in New Mexico. But what are some like local bands to you, or just maybe underground bands, like whether they're friends or just you're a fan of their music, that you think people should check out? Just shout out any friends or appreciated bands or anything you're really thinking about and maybe listening to lately.
I weirdly anticipated this question, and so I was thinking about like the Minneapolis artists that I follow before we got on this call. So I have a few ideas. So Ro Lorenzen, formerly of Static Panic, is producing now under Rotoscope Records, and she is like such a good producer. Like everything she does, it sounds like super sparkly and great. So anything that she touches, basically. Tanner, and actually basically everyone who is in Delilah Fang except for me is now in a band called Laurel that Tanner is writing songs for. So them definitely. In preparing for my radio show, I also come across a lot of artists where I'm like, wow, this is great, I should play it on my show. And then I'll be like, oh my God, and they're from Minneapolis. So there's one artist that I came across who goes by Cassette, and he does some pretty cool stuff. And then Lutalo, I think that's how you say it.
Yeah, I think they just opened for Adrian Lenker here on tour.
Yeah,
like something crazy.
I came across their single Warned Her, and I fucking love it.
Cool. I will ask though, are there any like friends in New Mexico or any artists you might recommend to someone who wants to kind of get an idea for some of the other bands you're checking out locally, like locally to you, and just some new artists for our ears over here?
Yes.
So I just asked the same question twice.
No, it's okay. Yeah, there's a lot of artists here that I like. So my friend Theo Krantz, he does a lot of like really cool ambient music that I like a lot. I have some friends that are in a band called the Bat Rays, and that's kind of like surf punk. They're super good. Teleporter is another one that I really dig. A local here that, I don't know, I don't want to draw like comparisons, but kind of like gives me Animal Collective vibes a little bit.
Oh, what was the name again? Because now I'm actually interested.
Teleporter.
Teleporter. Okay, I'm just actively gonna open that right now and remind me to look that up later.
An EP called Oldies that I really like. And then another friend of mine has a project called Sirens, and Sirens is spelled, sorry, my cat is like hanging out here. She's got a cool project, and that is spelled with a P at the beginning, so it's Psirens. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Cool. That's a good little roster of artists to kind of check out for anyone looking to find what's going around in New Mexico and Santa Fe. Cool. That wraps it up. So thank you so much for taking some time to chat. Definitely check out the new single and especially the self-titled EP. If you haven't already, it's available pretty much everywhere, like we talked about. Yeah, thank you again for taking time out of your Wednesday to talk about the music.
Yeah, thank you.
The Ear Coffee Podcast is a companion to the blog of the same name. If you like this episode, please leave us a rate and review so we can stand out among the other music podcasts. You can follow us at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @Ear Coffee. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.